she packed her things in silence, thinking she was a burden, until the cowboy fell in love with her. Sarah sat quietly on the edge of her small bed, her hands folded in her lap. The dim light of the evening filtered through the thin curtains, casting soft shadows across the room. She had just finished folding her mother's laundry, placing each neatly stacked shirt and towel on the worn dresser. The room smelled faintly of lavender and soap, a small comfort in her otherwise restless life. For years, Sarah had carried the weight of responsibilities on her shoulders, and tonight that weight felt heavier than ever. From the outside, her life seemed ordinary. She worked at the town's little diner, a place where the smell of freshly brewed coffee mixed with the warm aroma of baked pies. She had regular customers, people who nodded at her when she walked in, and some who even stopped to ask how she was doing. But no matter how many polite smiles she shared or how diligently she completed her work, Sarah often felt invisible. It was as if her presence was only noticed when something went wrong, or when her mother needed her care. And the truth was, she had grown tired of feeling like she was always on the edge of being too much for everyone around her. Sarah's mother had been ill for several years, and while she loved her dearly, caring for her had become a full-time job. Every day was filled with appointments, medicine schedules, and endless tasks that left little room for Sarah's own needs. She tried not to complain, reminding herself that she had chosen this path out of love. Still, there were moments when the exhaustion settled deep in her bones, moments when she longed for a day without responsibility, and tonight was one of those nights. She glanced around the small room she shared with her mother, taking in the worn wallpaper, the simple wooden furniture, and the little bookshelf crowded with novels she had collected over the years. Each book was a small escape, a doorway to a world where she could be someone else, somewhere else. Yet no matter how many stories she read, the feeling of being trapped in her own life remained. Sarah often wondered if she would ever feel free or if this was all she was destined to be, helpful, quiet, and always in the background. After folding the last piece of laundry, she sank back onto the bed and pulled her knees close to her chest. The quiet of the room was both comforting and lonely. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees, carrying the faint scent of fresh earth and distant flowers. It reminded her of the little walks she sometimes took through the town, the ones that allowed her to breathe for a moment, to feel that life was bigger than her worries. But even those walks had become rare lately, overshadowed by duties and an unshakable sense of being in the way. Sarah's thoughts wandered to her friends, though she had few these days. Most of them had moved on, starting careers, families, or lives in bigger towns. She kept in touch through occasional messages, but the distance between them felt wider than she wanted to admit. It wasn't that she disliked being alone. She had always valued quiet moments and solitude. But being alone because no one truly needed her, or because she felt like she was a burden, was different. That was a loneliness that pressed down on her, heavy and suffocating. She thought about the diner where she worked, the place where people smiled politely but rarely lingered. She remembered the day she had been asked to cover an extra shift, even though she was exhausted from caring for her mother. She had agreed without hesitation, as always, suppressing her own fatigue. That night, she had walked home under the pale glow of the streetlights, her body aching and her heart heavy. The memory brought a small ache in her chest. She often wondered if anyone noticed how much she gave, how much she carried for others without ever asking for anything in return. As she sat on the bed, Sarah's gaze fell on the small mirror on the dresser. She studied her reflection, the tired eyes, the faint lines of worry etched on her face, and the quiet sadness that seemed to follow her everywhere. She had always been kind, always willing to help, but kindness sometimes felt like a chain. She longed to be seen for who she was, not just for what she could do for others. And tonight, the longing felt stronger than ever. A soft knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. "Mom?" she called gently. There was no answer, only the quiet sound of the wind outside. Sarah stood and walked to the door, pressing her ear against it. Her mother was probably resting, as she often did in the late evening. It was a relief in one sense, but also a reminder of the solitude she faced. She returned to the bed and sat down again, hugging herself, trying to hold on to a sense of calm. For a long time, Sarah thought about leaving, not permanently, at least not in the dramatic way one might imagine. She only wanted a small break, a chance to breathe and find herself outside the confines of her responsibilities. But even that thought was complicated. Leaving could be seen as selfish, even cruel, and she hated the idea of disappointing anyone, especially her mother. So she stayed, night after night, carrying her silent burdens with a quiet dignity that few noticed. Despite her sadness, Sarah's heart was full of empathy. She remembered a young boy at the diner who always came in with his mother. He would smile shyly at her, and she always made sure he got the biggest slice of pie on the menu. She remembered helping an elderly neighbor carry groceries up the stairs, and the gratitude in his eyes had stayed with her long after. Small acts like these reminded her that her presence mattered, even if she didn't always feel it. The night stretched on, and Sarah finally lay down on her bed, staring at the ceiling. She thought about the life she had, the duty she bore, and the quiet love she carried for the people around her. Somewhere deep inside, she hoped for change, for someone to notice the weight she carried and to offer a hand, not just take it. She knew life was not simple, and she knew her struggles were not unique, yet the longing to be truly seen remained strong. Outside, the stars twinkled faintly, distant but steady. Sarah closed her eyes and let herself imagine a world where she could be free for a little while, where she could laugh without guilt, where her own needs mattered as much as anyone else's. And for a moment, just a fleeting moment, the weight seemed to lift slightly. Then, quietly, Sarah made a decision. Not a dramatic one, not a sudden escape, but a small, silent acknowledgement that she needed something more for herself. She would continue to care for her mother and do her best at the diner, but she would also hold on to the hope that life could offer more kindness, more recognition, and maybe, just maybe, a chance at happiness that didn't come from duty alone. She drifted into a light sleep that night, her mind filled with quiet determination. Though the world outside was vast and uncertain, Sarah knew that even in her small town, in her ordinary life, there was still room for something new. And though she did not yet know what that something was, the first spark of hope had begun to glow. Soft but undeniable, Sarah woke the next morning to the soft chirping of birds outside her window. The sunlight streamed gently through the curtains, painting the room in warm shades of gold. She rubbed her eyes and sat up, feeling the heaviness in her chest from the previous night's thoughts. The decision that had begun as a flicker in her mind now felt more certain. She needed a break, a chance to step away from the constant responsibilities that weighed her down. Not because she didn't love her mother, but because she loved herself enough to seek a little space, even if just for a short time. She went through her morning routine in quiet silence, making breakfast for her mother, without a word about her plan. The familiar sounds of the kitchen, the sizzling of eggs, the clatter of dishes, and the smell of toast offered a small comfort. Her mother murmured a soft good morning and smiled briefly, her eyes tired but kind. Sarah returned the smile, holding her tongue. How could she explain that she was thinking of leaving, even temporarily? without causing worry or pain. Words felt impossible, and silence seemed safer. After breakfast, Sarah returned to her bedroom and began to pack. She moved slowly, folding her few clothes with care and placing them neatly in her small duffel bag. Each item she packed felt heavier than the last, weighed down not by its physical mass, but by the emotions tied to it. Every shirt and pair of jeans was a piece of her life she was about to leave behind, even if only for a while. She included a few cherished books, the ones that had been her companions in countless quiet evenings. She wanted something familiar to hold on to when the world outside her home felt strange and new. As she packed, memories surfaced. The long nights of helping her mother with medication schedules, the quiet conversations she had shared with neighbors, and the small moments of kindness she had offered strangers, all of it came rushing back. She wondered if anyone would notice her absence. Would her friends miss her? Would her coworkers at the diner realize how much she contributed quietly every day? The thought made her chest tighten. She didn't want to hurt anyone, but she also couldn't continue feeling invisible in her own life. She sat on the bed for a long time, staring at the packed bag. Her hands traced the familiar fabric of a sweater she had worn countless times. It smelled faintly of home, of comfort, and of a life that felt both safe and confining. She closed her eyes and imagined herself walking down the main street of town, suitcase in hand, stepping out into a world she had never fully explored. The thought was thrilling and terrifying at the same time. What if she didn't know how to live outside the life she had always known? What if leaving only made her feel lonelier? After a moment, she took a deep breath and opened her eyes. She couldn't let fear stop her. She had lived her life quietly, always putting the needs of others before her own. Maybe this time she could do something for herself, even if it was small. She picked up a notebook and a pen and wrote a short, simple note for her mother. I needed to step away for a little while. I'll be back soon. Please don't worry. I love you. It wasn't much, but it was the best she could do. The words felt inadequate, but they were honest. She folded the note carefully and placed it on her mother's nightstand. Then, with a final glance around the room, Sarah zipped up her duffel bag and took a deep breath. She walked out of the house quietly, not wanting to disturb her mother, who was still resting. The morning air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of earth and wildflowers. She paused at the edge of the porch, taking in the view of the small town she had called home all her life. The streets were quiet, the shops still closed, and the familiar faces she had seen every day were nowhere in sight. For the first time in a long while, the world seemed wide and open, full of possibilities she hadn't allowed herself to imagine. Sarah began walking toward the bus station at the edge of town. She carried her bag carefully, feeling the weight of it on her shoulder. Each step felt like a small act of courage, a quiet rebellion against the life she had always lived. She passed the diner where she worked, the bakery where she sometimes bought fresh bread, and the small park where she had spent lazy afternoons reading her books. Each place held memories, some happy, some bittersweet. She didn't know if she would ever see them the same way again. As she walked, her mind wandered to the future. She didn't have a specific plan, only a vague idea that she needed to leave, to breathe, to find a place where she could feel light again. She imagined staying in a small town she had never visited, maybe finding work at another diner, or helping on a farm, or simply spending time outdoors. The possibilities were endless, and for the first time in years, the thought made her heart beat with a quiet excitement rather than dread. Despite her determination, a part of Sarah felt guilty. She worried about her mother waking up and finding her gone. She worried about the neighbors noticing her absence and wondering why she had left without a proper explanation. And most of all, she worried about the feeling of being selfish. She had been taught to put others first, and now she was doing something for herself. It felt strange, almost wrong, yet necessary. Hours passed as she made her way to the bus station. She sat on a bench, waiting for the next bus to take her out of town. Around her, life continued as usual. A man walked his dog, a child chased after a stray ball, and the baker's son carried a basket of fresh bread. It was the same world she had always lived in, but through her eyes, it felt different now. She was not just a participant in life. She was someone stepping into her own story, however uncertain the path might be. Finally, the bus arrived, rumbling to a stop in front of the station. Sarah took a deep breath, stood up, and hoisted her bag onto her shoulder. She handed over her ticket to the driver and found a seat near the window. As the bus pulled away from the familiar streets, she pressed her hand against the glass, watching her hometown shrink in the distance. A mix of fear and hope fluttered in her chest. She didn't know what awaited her, but she knew that this journey was something she needed. As the bus traveled down the winding roads, Sarah allowed herself to think about the life she wanted to create. She imagined waking up each morning without the heavy weight of constant responsibility pressing down on her. She pictured herself exploring new places, meeting new people, and discovering parts of herself she had never allowed to surface. She thought about the freedom to make small decisions just for herself, to enjoy simple pleasures without guilt, and to find joy in ways she had almost forgotten. The landscape outside the window changed gradually, fields stretching wide under the bright sun, forests lining the distant hills, and rivers glinting like silver threads. Sarah felt a quiet sense of wonder she hadn't felt in years. The world was vast, beautiful, and full of possibilities. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she belonged not just to a life of duty, but to a life that was hers to shape. Hours turned into evening, and the bus continued its journey. Sarah leaned her head against the window, letting the gentle motion lull her into a reflective calm. She thought about the small acts of kindness she had offered in her life, the people she had helped, and the love she had quietly given. Those memories reminded her that she had always had value, even if she had doubted it. And now, as she moved forward, she allowed herself to hope that the world outside her small town might see her the way she longed to be seen, as someone worthy of care, respect, and love. By the time the bus reached the outskirts of a new town, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Sarah felt a renewed sense of determination. She didn't know what awaited her, who she would meet, or what challenges she might face, but she was ready to discover them. She had made the decision to step out of her old life, to embrace uncertainty, and to trust that she could find her own path. As night fell, Sarah found a small inn on the edge of the town to rest for the night. The innkeeper greeted her warmly, offering a simple room with a soft bed and a window that looked out onto the quiet streets. She unpacked her bag, placing her belongings carefully on the small dresser. For the first time in a long time, she felt a sense of peace. She had taken the first step, and though the journey ahead was unknown, she felt ready to face it. Lying in bed that night, Sarah closed her eyes and listened to the sounds of a new town, the distant bark of a dog, the soft murmur of voices from the street, and the gentle rustle of the wind. It was different from home, unfamiliar yet comforting in its own way. She thought about the life she had left behind and the life she was beginning to build. Though fear lingered, it was accompanied by hope, a quiet promise that she could find joy, freedom, and perhaps even love in ways she had never imagined. Sarah drifted into sleep with a light heart, her mind filled with possibilities. She had stepped into the unknown, and though the road ahead was uncertain, she had taken the courage to move. Sarah woke early the next morning, the soft light of dawn spilling into her small room at the inn. The town outside was quiet, the streets empty except for a few early risers. She felt a strange mix of nervousness and excitement. Last night's journey had left her both tired and energized, as though stepping away from her old life had given her a tiny spark of freedom. Today she didn't know what awaited her, but she was determined to explore. After a simple breakfast at the inn, Sarah decided to walk through the town. The streets were narrow, lined with small shops, and the air smelled faintly of fresh bread and earth. She carried her duffel bag over her shoulder, a little heavier than she wished, but a comforting reminder of her belongings and the small steps she had taken toward independence. She moved slowly, absorbing the sights and sounds of a place entirely unfamiliar. It was strange to be somewhere new, but it felt invigorating, like opening the first page of a story she had yet to read. As she walked past a large wooden fence at the edge of town, she noticed a man working in a field beyond it. He was tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in worn jeans, a plaid shirt, and a dusty cowboy hat. He was repairing a fence post, hammering nails with steady precision, his movements calm and confident. There was something about him that caught Sarah's attention immediately, not just his physical presence, but the quiet way he seemed connected to the land around him. Sarah hesitated for a moment, unsure if she should continue walking or simply turn away. But curiosity won. She approached the fence slowly, her steps soft on the grassy path. The man looked up, his sharp eyes meeting hers, and for a moment neither spoke. There was a silence that felt natural, not awkward, as though they were simply acknowledging each other's existence in the quiet morning. "Good morning," Sarah said softly, her voice tentative. "Morning," the man replied, his tone calm but friendly. He set down the hammer and wiped his hands on a cloth. "You're new around here, aren't you?" Sarah nodded, a little shy. "Yes, I just arrived yesterday. I'm trying to find a place to settle for a while." She felt her cheeks warm, unsure how much to reveal to a stranger. "Well," he said, tipping his hat slightly, "you picked a quiet town. Not many strangers come through here." His voice was steady, warm, and somehow reassuring. "I'm Luke, by the way." "Sarah," she replied, offering a small smile. Something in his calm presence made her feel less like a stranger and more like someone who belonged, at least for this moment. Luke nodded, returning her smile. "It's nice to meet you, Sarah. Are you looking for work or just passing through?" She hadn't thought much about work yet, only about finding a place to breathe and a chance to feel free. But Luke's easy tone made her feel comfortable enough to answer honestly. "I'm not sure. I just wanted to see this town and figure things out. Maybe find a little place where I can start fresh." Luke's eyes softened. Fresh starts are hard to find, but sometimes they're worth looking for. "If you don't mind, I can show you around a bit." Sarah felt a flicker of hope. She nodded, grateful for the offer. "I'd like that." Over the next few hours, Luke led Sarah through the outskirts of the town, showing her small farms, a quiet river where she could rest, and a few hidden spots where wildflowers bloomed in colors she had never noticed before. He spoke of the land with a quiet reverence, explaining the seasons, the soil, and the care it took to work it properly. Sarah listened intently, fascinated by his knowledge and the ease with which he moved through the world. It was unlike anything she had experienced in her life so far, this calm connection to nature and purpose. As they walked, Sarah began to talk, cautiously at first, about her own life. She shared that she had cared for her mother, that she had worked at a diner in her hometown, and that she often felt invisible, carrying burdens no one seemed to notice. Luke listened without interruption, his presence steady and encouraging. He didn't judge, didn't offer empty advice, but simply acknowledged her words. It was a relief to be heard, really heard, by someone who didn't demand anything from her. "You've been carrying a lot," Luke said finally, his voice gentle. "It's no wonder you needed a break. But you're stronger than you realize. Sometimes we just forget to see it in ourselves." Sarah looked at him, surprised by the kindness in his words. Few people had ever said something like that to her, without expecting something in return. She felt a warmth in her chest, a tiny spark of confidence she hadn't felt in years. For the first time, she realized that maybe being seen wasn't just a dream. It was possible. They stopped by the river, where the water ran clear and cool over smooth stones. Sarah dipped her fingers into the water, letting the sensation wash over her. Luke watched her quietly, leaning on a wooden post nearby. They sat together in silence for a while, the kind of silence that felt comfortable, not empty. It was a new experience for Sarah, to be with someone without feeling judged or inadequate. "You know," Luke said after a while, "most people would have rushed through this, trying to see everything at once. But you notice the small things. That says a lot about you." Sarah smiled, a little shyly. "I suppose I've always been that way, paying attention to the little things, maybe because the big things are too heavy sometimes." Luke nodded thoughtfully. "I understand that. Life can be heavy, but noticing the small things helps carry it. And it seems you've been carrying a lot." The day passed quickly, filled with quiet conversation, shared laughter, and the simple joy of being outside in nature. Sarah felt a sense of peace she hadn't known she could feel. It wasn't just the beauty of the land, or the fresh air, or the novelty of a new town. It was the way Luke made her feel. She felt seen, valued, and even appreciated. It was strange, almost unbelievable, but undeniably real. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the fields, Luke walked Sarah back toward the inn. "I hope this town grows on you," he said, tipping his hat. "Sometimes it takes a while, but if you stay, you'll find your place here." Sarah nodded, feeling a little emotional.
Thank you, Luke.
"I'm glad I met you today." He smiled warmly. "Me too, Sarah. Sometimes the right people show up when we need them the most, even when we don't know it." That evening, as Sarah settled into her room at the inn, she felt a mixture of emotions. The day had been exhausting, but in a way that felt good, energizing and hopeful. She thought about the kindness Luke had shown, the gentle way he had listened, and the quiet respect he had offered her. For the first time in a long time, she felt a flicker of something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years, the possibility of connection, of companionship, of being seen not just for what she did, but for who she was. She took out her notebook and began to write. Not about leaving, not about burdens, but about the small moments that had made her heart feel lighter. The clear river, the blooming wildflowers, Luke's calm voice, and the way he had acknowledged her strength. Writing brought her a sense of clarity, a quiet way to process the flood of emotions that had accompanied her first day in the new town. As night fell, Sarah opened the window and looked out at the stars. The town was silent, peaceful, and she felt a gentle hope stirring within her. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, or if she would ever see Luke again. but for the first time in years, she allowed herself to believe that life could offer something more than duty and quiet sacrifice. She could imagine a future where kindness, connection, and maybe even love could be part of her story. Sarah drifted into a peaceful sleep that night, her heart lighter than it had been in a long time. She had met someone who saw her, who listened, and who treated her with a gentle respect that she had almost forgotten existed. And though the days ahead were uncertain, she felt ready to face them, knowing that for the first time she was not alone in her journey. The morning sunlight streamed through the small window of Sarah's room, and for the first time in weeks, she felt a sense of calm excitement instead of anxiety. The previous day had been unlike anything she had experienced before. Meeting Luke, the cowboy who seemed to carry both strength and kindness in equal measure, had shifted something inside her. It was more than curiosity. It was a feeling of connection she hadn't known she could feel so quickly. She had expected to spend her time in this new town quietly observing, perhaps settling into a routine, but now her heart was awake in a way it hadn't been for years. After a simple breakfast, Sarah packed a small bag and headed toward the outskirts of town. Luke had mentioned that the fields and pastures needed some help that morning, and she wanted to see if she could offer her assistance. She wasn't skilled in farm work, but she thought that even small contributions might be meaningful. As she approached the edge of town, she spotted Luke near the barn, leaning over a wooden crate and sorting tools. The sight of him brought a small, involuntary smile to her face. "Good morning," she called softly, waving. Luke looked up, his face breaking into a warm smile. "Morning, Sarah. Ready to get your hands dirty?" Sarah laughed lightly. "I guess so. I may not know much about farm work, but I'm willing to try." He nodded approvingly. "That's the best attitude to have. Come on, I'll show you what to do." Over the next few hours, Luke guided Sarah through simple tasks, feeding the chickens, stacking hay bales, and mending small sections of the fence. He was patient, correcting her gently when she struggled, and praising her when she succeeded. Sarah found herself laughing more freely than she had in years, enjoying the rhythm of the work and the feeling of contributing to something tangible. It was different from her life back home, where her efforts often felt invisible or taken for granted. Here, every small task she completed was acknowledged, and that acknowledgement filled her with a quiet pride. During a short break, Luke and Sarah sat under the shade of a large oak tree, sipping water and watching the fields stretch out before them. The sun was warm on their skin, and the soft breeze carried the scent of fresh grass and earth. Sarah found herself opening up, speaking about her past in a way she hadn't shared with anyone in a long time. She told him about her mother's illness, the endless responsibilities she had carried, and the feeling of always being in the background, unnoticed and unappreciated. Luke listened quietly, never interrupting, his eyes steady on hers. "Sarah," he said gently after she had finished, "I can't imagine how heavy that must have been, carrying so much for so long. But you've done it. You've survived, and you've cared for people in ways many wouldn't even attempt. That says a lot about who you are." Sarah felt a warmth spread through her chest. Few people had ever acknowledged her struggles so fully, and even fewer had done it without judgment. She realized that Luke's attention was different. It wasn't pity or sympathy. It was recognition, a simple understanding that she mattered. That realization brought a tear to her eye, one she quickly brushed away, embarrassed but unable to stop the emotion. As the day continued, their conversation shifted to lighter topics: the local wildlife, favorite books, and small dreams they had carried through life. Sarah laughed more than she had in months, discovering that sharing simple joys could be as healing as discussing hardships. Luke's laughter was easy and genuine, and it encouraged her to let go of some of the fear she carried about being vulnerable. She began to understand that trust could be built slowly through small moments, shared experiences, and quiet honesty. After lunch, Luke suggested they check on the fields near the river. The path was narrow and lined with wild flowers, their bright colors dancing in the gentle breeze. Sarah marveled at the beauty, feeling grateful that someone had shown her these hidden spots. It wasn't just the scenery that amazed her. It was the way Luke seemed to move through the world with a quiet confidence and respect, noticing details that most people overlooked. She found herself wanting to learn from him, not just about farm work, but about seeing the world differently. By mid-afternoon, they had finished their tasks and were sitting by the riverbank, dipping their feet into the cool water. The gentle flow created a soothing rhythm, and Sarah felt herself relaxing completely for the first time in what felt like forever. She watched the sunlight dance across the ripples and realized how much she had missed simple pleasures, moments that didn't carry obligations, expectations, or guilt. Here, she could just be herself. "Do you come here often?" she asked, breaking the comfortable silence. Luke smiled. "I do. It's peaceful, and it reminds me to slow down. Life can get busy, even out here, but this spot, it keeps me grounded," understanding more than she could explain. She thought about her own life, filled with duties and worries that left little space for peace. For the first time, she realized that finding a quiet place, both in the world and within herself, was not selfish. It was necessary. As the afternoon waned into evening, they walked back toward the barn, their conversation light and easy. Sarah felt a deepening sense of trust, a growing bond that went beyond simple friendship. She found herself sharing small personal stories, laughing at memories and feeling safe in Luke's presence. It was a feeling she hadn't allowed herself to experience in years, a quiet joy that filled her heart and softened the edges of her fears. Back at the barn, Luke paused and looked at her. "You know, Sarah, people like you don't come along often. The kind who carry so much and still find the courage to keep going. I admire that." Sarah felt her face warm, touched by his words. I've never thought of it that way," she admitted softly. "I've always felt like a burden, like I was too much for people to handle." Luke shook his head gently. "Not at all. You're strong, compassionate, and kind. Those things are never a burden. They're gifts, and anyone who can't see that isn't worth worrying about." His words sank in slowly, and for the first time, Sarah allowed herself to believe them. She had spent so long thinking she was a burden that the idea of being valued, truly valued, felt almost unbelievable. But the sincerity in Luke's eyes left no room for doubt. She began to understand that perhaps she had been too harsh on herself, too quick to dismiss her own worth. As dusk settled over the fields, they watched the sky turn shades of pink, orange, and purple. The world felt vast, peaceful, and alive, and Sarah felt a quiet gratitude for this unexpected connection. She realized that meeting Luke had not only given her companionship, but also a new perspective on herself. She could be strong and gentle, responsible and free, caring for others while also caring for herself. That night, Sarah returned to the inn with a heart that felt lighter than it had in years. She unpacked her bag and sat by the window, looking out at the quiet streets. The stars twinkled overhead, and she thought about the day, the laughter, and the moments of understanding she had shared with Luke. A smile touched her lips as she realized that trust and connection were not distant dreams. They were real, and they could grow, slowly and steadily, with the right person Before going to bed, she wrote in her notebook, recording the day's events and the feelings they had stirred within her. She wrote about the simple joys, the small victories, and the warmth of being seen and appreciated. Writing helped her process the emotions, turning them into something tangible and permanent. For the first time in a long while, she felt a sense of clarity, a quiet understanding that life could hold beauty, connection, and hope simultaneously. As she drifted off to sleep, Sarah felt a sense of anticipation for the days ahead. She didn't know what challenges might come or how her feelings for Luke would develop, but she knew she had discovered something important. She could trust again. She could allow herself to be vulnerable, and she could believe that love and friendship were not out of reach. The connection she had begun to form with Luke was not just a fleeting encounter. It was the beginning of something meaningful. A reminder that even after long periods of struggle and loneliness, the heart could still open, and life could still surprise her in ways she had never imagined. The morning sun rose gently over the small town, casting golden light across the fields and streets. Sarah woke feeling a quiet excitement she hadn't known in years. The last few days had been filled with unexpected discoveries about the town, about the work on the farm, and most importantly, about herself. She had come here seeking space and freedom, unsure of what she would find, and yet she now felt a sense of belonging that was both comforting and exhilarating. After breakfast, Sarah decided to walk to the fields where she had first met Luke. The morning air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of earth and dew. As she approached, she spotted him already working with the horses, moving with the calm confidence of someone deeply connected to the land. He looked up as she neared, his face lighting up with a warm, genuine smile. "Good morning," he called. "Good morning," Sarah replied, smiling back. There was a feeling between them now, subtle but undeniable, a quiet understanding that had grown over the past few days. Their connection was not rushed or forced. It had built naturally, like the gentle flow of the river they had visited together. Luke set down his tools and walked over to her. "I was wondering if you'd join me today," he said. "There's work to do with the fields, but I thought we could start with the new garden plot. It needs some attention, and I could use your help." Sarah nodded enthusiastically. "I'd love to." She realized that helping wasn't just about the physical work. It was about being part of something meaningful, about seeing the results of effort and care. Here, her contributions were noticed, appreciated, and valued. It was a sharp contrast to her previous life, where her work often went unseen, no matter how much she gave. As they worked together, planting seeds and tending to the soil, their conversation flowed easily. They shared small stories about their pasts, their favorite moments, and their little dreams for the future. Sarah laughed freely, the sound bright and unburdened. She realized how much she had missed this kind of companionship, someone who listened without judgment, who encouraged rather than criticized, and who could make her feel safe simply by being present. Luke paused and looked at her with a serious but gentle expression. "Sarah, I want you to know that you don't have to carry everything alone. You've been strong for so long, and that's admirable, but it's okay to let someone in, to share the load." Sarah felt a warmth spread through her chest. These words, simple as they were, carried a depth she hadn't anticipated. She had spent so long believing she was a burden that the idea of allowing someone to truly share her life felt both frightening and liberating. But looking at Luke, seeing the sincerity in his eyes, she realized that trust and connection were not only possible, they were essential for a life worth living. The day passed in quiet labor and soft conversation. As they worked, Sarah began to notice details she had overlooked before. The delicate patterns of sunlight through the leaves, the way the soil smelled after a fresh rain, and the gentle rhythm of life on the farm. Luke pointed out small signs of growth in the garden, explaining how each plant needed care and attention. Sarah felt a deep sense of accomplishment as she saw the first seedlings breaking through the soil, a tangible result of her effort and care. By afternoon, the sun was high, and they took a break under the shade of an old oak tree. Luke handed her a small bottle of water, and they sat together in companionable silence. Sarah felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced in years. The world felt lighter, and for the first time she realized that she didn't need to bear the weight of life alone. There was joy in sharing, in connection, and in allowing oneself to be seen. As the days turned into weeks, Sarah settled into a new rhythm. She worked on the farm alongside Luke, learning new skills and discovering her own strengths. Each day brought small victories: a repaired fence, a thriving garden, a horse she had learned to care for, and each victory reinforced her growing confidence. She found herself laughing more, sleeping more peacefully, and thinking less about the burdens she had carried in the past. Her relationship with Luke deepened naturally. They shared meals, stories, and quiet evenings by the fire, talking about everything and nothing. Luke's presence became a constant source of comfort and encouragement. He noticed her strengths, praised her efforts, and gently reminded her that she was valued. Sarah, in turn, began to see herself differently. She realized that her worth was not measured by what she could do for others, but by the person she was: kind, thoughtful, and resilient. One evening, as the sun set over the fields, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Luke and Sarah walked along the riverbank. The water reflected the colors of the sky, and the world felt serene and infinite. Sarah felt a quiet courage stirring inside her, a willingness to embrace life fully, without fear or doubt. "Luke," she said softly, "I never imagined I could feel this way. I thought leaving home would only bring freedom from responsibility, but it's given me so much more. I feel lighter, happier, and seen in ways I never thought possible." Luke smiled, taking her hand gently in his. "Sarah, you've always had that light inside you. You just needed a chance to see it for yourself. And I'm glad I could be here to remind you." Her heart swelled with a mix of gratitude and affection. She realized that Luke had become more than a friend. He had become a partner in her journey, someone who respected her past but encouraged her to embrace the future. For the first time, she felt that love was not something to fear, but something to cherish and grow. Days turned into weeks, and Sarah found herself fully immersed in this new life. She explored the town, met neighbors who welcomed her warmly, and continued to work alongside Luke, building not just the farm but a sense of home and belonging. She allowed herself to laugh without guilt, to dream without fear, and to be vulnerable without hesitation. The small town that had once seemed distant and unfamiliar now felt like a place where she could truly thrive. One afternoon, while they were tending to the garden, Luke paused and looked at her with a gentle seriousness. "Sarah, I know life hasn't been easy for you, but I want you to know that I care for you, not just for what you do, but for who you are. I've grown to love you." Sarah felt her breath catch. The words were simple, yet they carried a depth of meaning that filled her heart. She looked into his eyes and saw the honesty, the warmth, and the patience that had drawn her to him from the very beginning. Her own feelings, long buried under doubt and fear, rose to the surface. I love you too, Luke," she whispered, tears of happiness forming in her eyes. "I've been so afraid of being a burden, of being too much, but with you, I feel safe. I feel seen. I feel loved. Luke smiled, taking both of her hands in his. And you are, Sarah. You've always been worthy of love, even when you couldn't see it yourself. It felt from that day forward, their bond strengthened further. Sarah no longer carried her fears alone. She shared her joys, her worries, and her dreams with Luke. And together, they built a life filled with mutual respect, love, and partnership. She learned that accepting help, allowing herself to be loved, and embracing her own worth did not make her weak. It made her human, and it allowed her to thrive. In the months that followed, Sarah and Luke worked side by side on the farm, exploring the surrounding countryside and enjoying the simple pleasures of life. They celebrated small victories, shared quiet evenings by the fire, and supported each other through challenges. Sarah felt a deep sense of fulfillment, knowing that she had found a place and a person where she could truly be herself. One evening, as they watched the sunset together from the hill overlooking the farm, Sarah reflected on her journey. She thought about the quiet nights she had spent feeling like a burden, the long days of responsibility and duty, and the moment she had decided to step away from her old life. That decision, once terrifying, had led her to this: peace, love, and a sense of purpose she had never imagined. She turned to Luke, her eyes shining with gratitude and joy. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything. For seeing me, for listening, and for helping me believe in myself again." Luke smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "No, Sarah. Thank you. You trusted yourself enough to take a chance, and you trusted me enough to let me in. That's what made all the difference." As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant colors, Sarah felt a quiet certainty. She had found not only love, but also self-acceptance. She understood that her worth was never determined by what she could do for others, but by the person she was and the love she could give and receive. And with Luke by her side, she knew that life, no matter how uncertain, would always hold hope, joy, and connection. Sarah smiled, taking Luke's hand and squeezing it gently. She felt a sense of peace she had never known, a lightness in her heart that told her she had finally arrived, not just in this new town, but in her own life. For the first time, she truly believed in herself, in love, and in the possibility of happiness that was fully hers to embrace.